3 days ago, my daughter-in-law handed me a gift wrapped in silver paper with a white bow. Inside were nursing home brochures and papers to sign me away. She looked me dead in the eyes and told me I needed to be gone before her daughter's wedding because my forgetfulness was embarrassing. She thought I was too confused to fight back. She thought wrong. And what I did at her luxury wedding, in front of 200 guests, destroyed her perfect life forever. But before I tell you how I got my revenge, you need to understand something. I'm Margaret. I'm 78 years old, and this story isn't just about me. It's about every single person watching this who's ever been treated like they're disposable, like they're too much trouble, like they don't matter anymore because they're old or sick or not convenient. If that's you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, stay with me, because what happened next is going to shock you. And listen, hit that subscribe button right now because this channel is your safe space, your community, the place where people like us refuse to disappear just because someone else finds us inconvenient. We're building something powerful here, and you need to be part of it. Subscribe now and turn on notifications, because the stories I share here, they might save your life or give you the courage to save yourself. Let me paint you a picture of what it feels like to forget. You're standing in your own living room, the room where you've lived for 40 years, and suddenly it feels foreign, like you're in a stranger's house. You're looking at photographs of moments you know you lived, moments that shaped your entire existence, but you can't quite touch them anymore. They're behind glass, beautiful and real, but impossibly far away, like watching your own life through a window you can't open. Your grandson asks you to tell him about the zoo trip you took him on, the one he talks about constantly, and you can see his eager face. You can feel the love radiating from him, but the actual memory is like trying to grab smoke. Your hands close around nothing. And here's the worst part, the part that kills you slowly from the inside. You watch the people you love most, the people you sacrificed everything for, start to lose patience with you. You see it in their eyes when you ask the same question twice. You hear it in their voices when they have to remind you again about dinner time. You feel it in the way they exchange glances over your head like you're not even there, like you're already gone, like you're just a shell they have to manage until you finally disappear completely. It's death by 1,000 tiny moments of disappointment. Every forgotten name, every repeated question, every moment of confusion is another brick in the wall being built between you and the people who used to see you as whole. But here's what they don't understand. My mind might be hiding memories in places I can't find them, but my heart hasn't forgotten a single thing. I remember the feeling of holding my son David when he was born, even if I can't always remember what year it was. I remember the overwhelming love I felt when Jessica joined our family, even if sometimes I forget yesterday's conversation. I remember every emotion, every ounce of love I poured into this family, even when the details blur. Those feelings are still here, still real, still as vivid as ever. So when Jessica sat across from me 3 days ago in my own kitchen, the kitchen where I baked birthday cakes for her children, where I taught her my mother's recipes, where I held her hand when she cried about her problems, and told me it was time for professionals to handle me, I felt every single word like a knife. The way she said professionals, like I was a project needing management, a problem needing solving, a burden needing disposal. I watched her perfectly manicured nails drumming on my table while she explained that nursing homes have activities and trained staff, and I'd be so much happier there, so much better cared for, so much less of a problem for everyone. She never said the last part out loud, but I heard it anyway. I've always been good at hearing what people don't say, and here's the thing you need to know. The thing that's going to blow your mind when I tell you the full story. Jessica wrapped those nursing home papers like a gift for a reason. She wrapped them in silver with a white bow because in her twisted mind, she was doing me a favor. She genuinely believed, or at least she'd convinced herself, that shipping me off to Sunny Meadows retirement community 3 days before her daughter's luxury wedding was an act of love. Can you believe that? She'd worked herself into this narrative where she was the hero, the devoted daughter-in-law who was making the hard choices, who was being realistic about my needs, who was putting my well-being first. Never mind that what I needed was to stay in my own home. Never mind that what I needed was family who didn't treat me like garbage. Never mind that what I needed was basic human dignity and respect. Jessica had decided what was best for me, and Jessica always gets what she wants. Or at least she did until 3 days later at that wedding. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, you need to understand how I ended up here. How I went from being a homeowner to someone who could be evicted with 3 days' notice. 4 years ago, when the forgetting started getting bad, when I couldn't manage the bills anymore, when numbers stopped making sense and paperwork felt like trying to read a foreign language, David and Jessica convinced me to sign my house over to them. My house. The house my husband and I built together, where we raised David, where we celebrated 50 Christmases and countless birthdays, and ordinary Tuesday evenings that were somehow more precious than any celebration. They made it sound so reasonable. Estate planning purposes, they said. Making things easier, they said. Protecting me from making financial mistakes, they said. David held my hand and told me he just wanted to take care of me the way I'd always taken care of him. Jessica brought tea and cookies and sat with me while I signed, telling me this house would always be my home no matter what, that they loved me, that they'd never let anything bad happen to me. I trusted them completely. Why wouldn't I? David is my only child, the boy I raised alone after his father died, the man I sacrificed everything for. And Jessica seemed so caring back then, so attentive, so genuinely concerned about my well-being. Looking back now, and this is going to sound paranoid, but stay with me because I promise it's not, I can see how Jessica was always just a little too helpful, a little too involved in every aspect of my life, a little too controlling of the narrative about my condition. She was the one managing my medications, taking me to doctors, interpreting what they said, making decisions about my care. And here's where it gets dark. When I tried to tell David I was feeling pretty good on a particular day, that my mind was clear, that I was managing fine, Jessica would gently contradict me. She'd remind me of things I'd supposedly done or said that I couldn't remember. She'd express concern about my lack of awareness of my own decline. She'd tell David later when she thought I couldn't hear that this lack of insight was a symptom of the disease, that not recognizing your own deterioration was part of the process, that we needed to be realistic about where I was heading. And David believed her. Of course he did. She was taking such good care of me, spending so much time managing my health, doing so much work to keep me safe. If she said I was getting worse, he had no reason to doubt her, but I doubted. Deep inside, underneath all the confusion and fear, I knew something was wrong with her story. There were moments when I was absolutely certain I hadn't done the things she said I'd done. Times when I knew I'd taken my medication, but she insisted I hadn't. Times when I was sure I'd turned off the stove, but she'd show me it was on and look at me with that concerned expression that made me feel crazy. I started keeping a notebook to track things, but then the notebook would disappear and turn up days later in the refrigerator or the bathroom cabinet, and Jessica would show David as more evidence of how bad I was getting. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, like I couldn't trust my own perceptions, like the ground was constantly shifting under my feet. That's what gaslighting does, although I didn't know that word back then. I didn't know that what I was experiencing had a name, that other people had lived through it, that I wasn't just going insane the way everyone kept implying. But you know what? Some part of me, some deep stubborn part that Jessica couldn't quite kill, held on to the truth. And that part was about to get very, very loud. Now, before I tell you what I did next, before I reveal how I destroyed Jessica's perfect wedding in the most spectacular way possible, I need you to do something. If you're watching this and you've ever been made to feel like you're too much, like you're a burden, like you'd be better off just disappearing to make everyone else's life easier, I need you to leave a comment right now. Write exactly these words. I deserve to be loved, not tolerated. Don't change it. Don't add to it. Just write those 6 words. Because here's the thing. When you write that comment, you're not just engaging with a video. You're making a declaration about your own worth. You're standing up for yourself and for everyone else who's ever been treated as disposable. You're joining a community of people who refuse to shrink, who refuse to disappear, who refuse to accept anything less than genuine love and respect. And when someone watching this tomorrow or next week sees hundreds of comments, all saying the same thing, all declaring that same truth, it's going to give them the strength they need to keep fighting. So pause this video right now if you have to. Scroll down and write, I deserve to be loved, not tolerated. Do it for yourself. Do it for me. Do it for everyone watching who needs to see those words. I'll wait. Seriously. Go do it now. Because what I'm about to tell you next is going to make so much more sense once you've claimed your own value, once you've stated out loud that you matter, once you've joined this community of people who are done being pushed aside. Okay, you wrote it right? You left that comment? Good, because now we're getting to the good part. The day after Jessica gave me those papers, something incredible happened. I woke up with absolute clarity. If you've dealt with memory issues, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There are these windows, these precious moments when the fog lifts completely and you can think clearly, when you can plan and strategize and remember everything you need to remember. It's like your brain gives you a gift for a few hours, and you better use it while it lasts because you never know when the fog will roll back in. That morning, I knew I had time. I could feel it. I could sense that I had a good, clear stretch ahead of me. So I got up, looked at myself in the mirror, and I saw something I hadn't seen in months. I saw a fighter. I saw someone who'd been knocked down but wasn't knocked out. I saw a woman who'd been counted out but wasn't finished. I made coffee, grabbed a fresh notebook that I hid where Jessica would never find it, and I started to plan. First thing I did was call my old lawyer Martin, who'd been friends with my husband for 40 years. I hadn't talked to him in years because Jessica had convinced me we didn't need him, that she and David had everything handled. But I found his number in an old address book, and I called him before anyone else woke up. When Martin heard what Jessica had done, when I explained the nursing home papers and the timing and the manipulation, I could hear the fury in his voice. We talked for 2 hours about the house transfer, about the promises that had been made, about elder abuse laws, about my legal rights. And here's what I learned. When someone with cognitive issues signs over property under promises of lifetime care, if those promises are broken, there are remedies. We could challenge the transfer. We could file for abuse. We could take back everything Jessica thought she'd won. Martin started building a case immediately, gathering documents, preparing paperwork, getting ready for legal war. But I told him to wait on filing anything, because I didn't want a quiet legal battle that might drag on for years. I wanted something much more immediate, much more public, much more devastating to Jessica's carefully constructed image. Next, I called my sister Ruth, who lives 2 states away and who'd been warning me about Jessica for years. Ruth never liked her, never trusted her, always said Jessica was manipulative and cold underneath the smile. I hadn't wanted to hear it back then. I'd defended Jessica, made excuses, chosen to believe the performance over the truth Ruth was trying to show me. But now I needed Ruth's strength, her clarity, her willingness to fight. When I told her about the nursing home papers, about the wedding, about what I was planning, she said, "I'm on the next flight out. Don't sign anything else. I'm coming." Ruth arrived 2 days later, and the look on Jessica's face when she walked through the door was priceless. Pure panic, quickly masked, but I saw it. Ruth wasn't supposed to be part of Jessica's plan. Over the next few days, Ruth and I planned everything down to the last detail. We gathered evidence, organized documents, prepared exactly what we'd say and when we'd say it, and I played my part perfectly. I acted even more confused than I was, more helpless, more lost. I needed Jessica confident, convinced she'd won, certain I was too far gone to be any threat. The wedding day arrived on a perfect Saturday in June. Sunny, 75 degrees, gentle breeze making the ribbons flutter on the white chairs. The backyard had been transformed into something from a magazine. White roses and hydrangeas everywhere, hundreds of them, probably costing more than most people's cars. String lights overhead waiting to glow at sunset. Tables with silk linens and centerpieces that cost more than my monthly expenses. The guests started arriving around 4, and watching them was like watching a parade of wealth and status. Women in designer dresses and expensive jewelry. Men in custom suits with watches that cost more than nursing home care. The kind of people who compare vacation homes and name-drop country clubs. These were Christopher's family and Jessica's carefully curated list of people she wanted to impress. People whose approval meant everything to her social climbing ambitions. Jessica was glowing, floating around in her mother-of-the-bride dress that probably cost thousands, greeting everyone with that practiced smile, basking in admiration. Chloe looked beautiful in her wedding dress. I'll give Jessica that. The ceremony was perfect. Vows under a rose-covered arch, string quartet playing, 200 people crying happy tears. When they kissed as husband and wife, everyone applauded. I cried too, but my tears were different. I was crying for the family I thought I had, for the trust that had been shattered, for the years I'd wasted believing I was loved when I was just tolerated. The reception started immediately after. Multiple-course dinner, champagne flowing, elaborate toasts between courses. courses. David gave a speech about his daughter. Christopher's father welcomed Chloe to their family. And then it was Jessica's turn. She stood with her champagne glass raised, and the whole crowd went quiet to hear the mother of the bride. She talked about Chloe's childhood, about her sacrifices as a mother, about how this wedding represented everything she'd worked for. She went on and on about this beautiful property and this perfect day, taking credit for everything, acting like she'd created this magical moment through sheer force of will. She talked about the venue like it was hers, like she'd built this house and planted these gardens. She didn't mention me once, not once. Didn't acknowledge this was my home, my garden, my life's work being used as her backdrop. Didn't mention I'd helped raise Chloe, taught her to bake, held her when she cried, been there for her in ways Jessica conveniently forgot. I'd been erased from the story completely, and you could see from Jessica's glowing face that she thought she'd pulled it off perfectly, thought she'd eliminated the inconvenient old woman without anyone noticing or caring. That's when Ruth stood up. She didn't ask permission. She just stood with her glass raised, and her voice rang out clear and strong across the garden. I'd like to say a few words too, if I may. Jessica's face went from glowing to pale in a heartbeat. The crowd looked confused but interested. Ruth smiled, that dangerous smile that meant someone was about to get exactly what they deserved. "I'm Margaret's sister," she announced, gesturing to me, "and I think it's time everyone here knew the truth about whose property you're celebrating on, and what was supposed to happen to Margaret 3 days ago." You could have heard a pin drop. 200 people holding their breath, every eye suddenly on Ruth, every ear straining to hear what came next. Jessica tried to interrupt, tried to laugh it off, but Ruth spoke over her. She told them about the nursing home papers. She told them how I'd signed over my house 4 years ago, under the promise I'd always have a home here, that I'd be cared for, that I'd never be abandoned. She told them about Jessica's phone conversations where she called me a burden and joked about my confusion. She told them about the systematic gaslighting, the hidden items, the exaggerated symptoms, the manipulation. Ruth pulled out her phone and read from emails I'd sent her over the years, emails I'd forgotten I'd written, describing Jessica's cruelty, my fear, the feeling of going crazy because my reality never matched what Jessica told everyone was happening. The crowd was riveted. These comfortable, wealthy people who'd come for champagne and cake were getting real drama, raw truth, uncomfortable reality they couldn't look away from. I watched Jessica's friends start whispering, their expressions changing from confusion to shock to judgment. I watched David's face as he realized what he'd missed or chosen not to see. I watched Chloe crying, not happy tears now, but tears of embarrassment and confusion as her perfect day collapsed. And Jessica looked like she wanted to disappear, to sink into the ground and never be seen again. Her face cycled through colors, pale to red to purple, as panic and rage and shame fought for control. She kept trying to stop Ruth, but my sister is unstoppable when she's fighting for something that matters. 3 days ago, Ruth continued, her voice unwavering, Jessica gave Margaret a gift wrapped in silver paper. Inside were nursing home brochures and admission papers. She told her mother-in-law, the woman who gave her everything, that it was time to go, that her forgetfulness was embarrassing, that she needed to be gone before this wedding. She wanted Margaret out of this house, the house Margaret built with her late husband, the house Margaret signed over believing she'd always be welcome, so she could have the perfect backdrop for her daughter's wedding without the inconvenience of a confused old woman ruining the photos. Ruth let that sink in, let the crowd absorb the cruelty. Then she looked directly at Jessica. What you didn't know, what you were too arrogant to consider, is that Margaret might have memory problems, but she's still here. She still feels everything. She still understands what you've done, and she remembers enough to know exactly what you are. Have you ever watched someone's world collapse in real time? That's what I was seeing. Jessica trying to find words, trying to spin it, realizing there was no way out, no explanation that would make 200 people forget what they'd just heard. And I felt satisfaction, yes, but also deep sadness, because this was the final death of the family I thought I had. This was acknowledging that the love I believed in was never real, that Jessica's warmth was always fake, always conditional, always maintained only as long as I was useful. But you know what? That sadness was mixed with something else. Power. agency, the knowledge that I'd fought back, that I'd refused to disappear quietly, that I'd made Jessica face consequences in front of the people whose opinions mattered most to her. Then Christopher's mother, Patricia, stood up and said clearly, "I think we should hear from Margaret herself." Every eye turned to me. 200 people looking at the confused old lady they'd barely noticed, who they now realized was central to everything. My hands shook. My heart pounded. This was it, my moment. But now that it was here, I felt terrified. What if my mind betrayed me? What if I stood up and couldn't remember what to say? What if the fog came back and I proved Jessica's point? But then I felt Ruth's hand on my shoulder, steady and strong, and I felt something else. Anger. Clean, pure, focusing anger. The anger of every old person dismissed, every sick person treated as less than human, every vulnerable person taken advantage of by someone they trusted. That anger cleared my mind like nothing else could. I stood up. I didn't have notes. I didn't have a prepared speech. I just looked at Jessica, really looked at her, and I started talking. "I have Alzheimer's disease," I said, voice stronger than expected. "Some days are better than others. Some days I can't remember what year it is. Some days I ask the same questions over and over. It's terrifying and it makes me feel like I'm losing myself piece by piece. But having Alzheimer's doesn't mean I stopped being a person. It doesn't mean I don't feel pain or love or betrayal. It doesn't mean I deserve to be thrown away when I become inconvenient." The crowd waited in absolute silence. 4 years ago, I signed this house over to my son and his wife. They promised me, swore to me, this would always be my home, that they'd take care of me, that I'd be safe here for the rest of my life. I believed them. David is my son. Jessica seemed so kind, so caring. I trusted them completely. But 3 days ago, Jessica gave me a present, nursing home brochures, papers to sign me away. She told me I was too much work, that my forgetfulness was embarrassing, that I needed to be gone before this wedding. I looked around at all the shocked faces. "This backyard where you're sitting? My husband planted every one of those rose bushes. That oak tree? We planted it when David was born. This house, this property, this is my life, my memories, my history." And Jessica wanted to take it all and pretend I never existed. David stood up, looking devastated. "Mom, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know about the nursing home papers." He turned to Jessica. "Is this true? Did you really do this?" Jessica tried to defend herself, saying something about being practical, about me needing more care than they could provide, about thinking of everyone's best interests. But her words sounded hollow with 200 people staring at her in judgment. "My best interest?" I asked, voice getting louder. "My best interest would have been treating me like a human being. My best interest would have been a family discussion. My best interest was not being ambushed with nursing home papers 3 days before a wedding, not being told I was an embarrassment, not being made to feel like garbage that needed disposing of." Chloe was sobbing, her perfect wedding imploding. Part of me felt terrible. She was innocent, just a young woman who wanted a nice wedding, but she needed to learn this lesson before she became like her mother, before she learned to see people as convenient or inconvenient rather than human. "I'm sorry, Chloe," I said. "You don't deserve this, but I couldn't let your mother get away with this. I couldn't let her think it was okay to treat people this way, and I couldn't spend whatever time I have left wondering if I should have stood up for myself, if I should have fought back, if I should have shown her that being old and sick doesn't mean being powerless." The wedding fell apart after that. Some guests left immediately, whispering, already composing the stories they'd tell about the most dramatic wedding they ever attended. Others stayed, but the joy was gone. People going through motions with celebration sucked out of it. Christopher's family looked shell-shocked, probably wondering what family they'd married into. David pulled me aside, away from the crowd, and broke down. He cried like I hadn't seen since he was a boy, apologizing over and over, saying he'd failed me, saying he should have seen what was happening, should have protected me. I held him while he cried, this grown man who was still my baby, and I told him the truth. I forgave him. I understood he'd been caught in the middle, that Jessica was good at hiding her true nature, but I also told him things had to change, that I couldn't stay where I wasn't truly welcome, that we needed to figure something out that didn't involve me being pushed aside. Ruth had already been working on that. Remember those phone calls? My lawyer Martin had been busy. Turns out, when someone with cognitive decline signs over property under promises of lifetime care that are later broken, there are legal remedies. We could challenge the transfer. We could take back the house. We could make Jessica and David legally responsible for breaching their promises. Martin had everything ready, waiting for my signal. I didn't want to destroy my son, didn't want to leave him homeless, but I needed leverage, needed security, needed to know I couldn't just be disposed of whenever I became inconvenient. So we came to an arrangement. Martin formalized it legally within a week. I got a life estate in the house, meaning I have the legal right to live here until I die and they can't force me out. I got a generous monthly allowance for my care, medications, needs, and Jessica got a restraining order requiring her to treat me with basic human dignity, with severe financial penalties if she violates it. But here's the twist. Here's the thing nobody saw coming. The thing that changes everything you think you understand about this story. Are you ready? Because this is going to blow your mind. After all that, after the wedding humiliation, after the legal arrangements, after everything fell apart, I started having more and more clear days. So many that Ruth insisted I see a new doctor, a specialist. After extensive testing, they discovered something shocking. I don't have Alzheimer's disease. I never did. What I have is something called pseudodementia, a condition that mimics Alzheimer's but is actually caused by severe depression and anxiety. The symptoms are almost identical. Memory problems, confusion, difficulty with daily tasks. But it's treatable. With the right medication and therapy, it's actually reversible. For 4 years, I'd been living with a misdiagnosis, believing I was slowly losing my mind to an incurable disease, getting worse because everyone treated me like I was worse, creating a cycle where my depression intensified my symptoms, which made people treat me worse, which made my mental state deteriorate further. You want to know the really devastating part? Jessica had been managing my medical care, taking me to appointments, speaking to doctors, filling prescriptions. Whether she knew the truth or just didn't care enough to question the diagnosis, whether she actively prevented proper testing or conveniently accepted a misdiagnosis that served her purposes, I'll never know. But the effect was the same. She kept me trapped, believing I was losing myself, used my supposed disease to justify treating me as less than human, was planning to lock me away when I was actually suffering from something treatable. When the new diagnosis came back, when the doctor explained what had really been happening, I sat in that office and cried for hours. I cried for the years lost to unnecessary fear. I cried for the version of myself I thought was dying, but was actually just buried under depression and mistreatment. I cried for all the times I second-guessed myself, wondered if I was really as bad as Jessica said, believed I deserved to be put away. The medication helped almost immediately. Within weeks, the fog started lifting. My memory improved dramatically. I could think clearly most of the time, manage my own affairs, be myself again. It was like waking from a nightmare that lasted years. And the strangest part? As I got better, I realized how much of my supposed decline had been situational. When you live with someone who treats you as incompetent, who questions everything you do, who makes you feel worthless, your brain starts to believe it. You act the way they expect you to act. You fulfill the prophecy they create. Being removed from that toxic environment, having Ruth's support, knowing I had legal protection, actually getting proper treatment, it all combined to give me back my life. So here's where we are now. 6 months after that wedding, I'm still in my house with legal protections, meaning nobody can force me out. David and I are rebuilding our relationship slowly, carefully, with a family therapist. He's ashamed of what happened, what he allowed, and he's working hard to make amends. Jessica and I barely speak, but that's fine. She can't touch me, can't manipulate me, can't make me feel small. Chloe visits regularly, talks to me, listens to my stories. She's horrified by what her mother did, learning hard lessons about how not to treat people. Ruth moved closer, bought an apartment 20 minutes away so she can check on me. So I always have someone in my corner. I'm taking painting classes at the community center. Turns out I have talent. Or maybe I always did and never had the chance to discover it. I'm making friends, real friends who see me as a whole person. I go to a support group for people misdiagnosed or who've struggled with depression in later life. So many of us with similar stories of being dismissed, written off, assumed to be declining when we were really just sad or anxious or trapped in toxic situations. I'm living my life, really living it, in a way I haven't in years. And I'm making sure everyone who underestimated me, everyone who thought they could dispose of me, everyone who treated me like I didn't matter, has to watch me thrive. That's the best revenge, isn't it? Not destroying them, but simply refusing to disappear the way they wanted, refusing to shrink into nothing, refusing to be anything less than fully, vibrantly, stubbornly alive. Now listen to me carefully. If you've made it this far, if you've sat through this whole messy, painful, triumphant tale, then you understand what I'm trying to tell you. There are so many people in situations like mine, people being dismissed or devalued or prepared for disposal by family, who see them as burdens rather than humans. There are people watching right now, wondering if they're really as bad as everyone says, questioning their own worth, starting to believe they deserve to be put aside. I need those people to hear this. You are not too much. You are not a burden. You do not deserve to be treated as disposable. Whatever you're dealing with, whether it's actual Alzheimer's or dementia or depression or any challenge that makes life harder, you still matter. Your life still has value. You still deserve love and dignity and respect. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Don't let anyone make you small. Don't let anyone erase you from your own story. And if you're the family member taking care of someone struggling, I know it's hard. I know it's exhausting. I know there are days you can't do it anymore. But please remember the person you're caring for is still in there, still feeling everything, still deserving your compassion. When you talk about them like they're not in the room, they hear you. When you treat them like they're incompetent, they feel it. When you make plans to put them away without including them, they understand what you're really saying about their value. There are ways to get help that don't involve dehumanizing the person you love. Reach out for support, join caregiving groups, talk to professionals. But don't become like Jessica. Don't let exhaustion turn you into someone who sees their loved one as a problem rather than a person. Before we end this, I need you to do 3 things. First, if you haven't already, leave that comment. I deserve to be loved, not tolerated. Write it right now. Second, smash that like button. Seriously, hit it as hard as you can. Because when you like this video, you're telling YouTube's algorithm that this story matters, that this message needs to reach more people, that there are thousands of us out there who refuse to accept that age or illness makes us disposable. Every like helps this video reach someone who desperately needs to hear it. So, like it right now, then share it with someone who needs this message. Share it on your social media. Send it to that friend who's dealing with a difficult family situation. Post it in groups where people might benefit from hearing that they're not alone. Because here's the truth. This video might save someone's life. It might give someone the courage to stand up for themselves. It might help someone realize they're not crazy. They're not too much. They're not the problem. Your like, your share, your comment, all of that matters. All of that makes a real difference. Third and most important, subscribe to this channel right now. Don't wait. Don't put it off. Don't tell yourself you'll do it later. Click that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this channel is your community. This is where we build something powerful together, where we refuse to go quietly, where we insist on our worth, where we stand up for ourselves and each other. When you subscribe, you're not just following a channel. You're joining a movement of people who believe humans matter, regardless of age or health. You're saying you refuse to accept a world where the elderly and sick are treated as disposable. You're connecting with thousands who need these stories as much as you do. And here's what I promise if you subscribe. I promise stories that will make you feel less alone. I promise a community that will support you when you're struggling. I promise content that treats you with the respect you deserve. I promise I'll keep fighting, keep speaking up, keep refusing to be silenced or dismissed or pushed aside. Every week I'm sharing a new story, sometimes from my own life, sometimes from others who've reached out to me, always focused on reminding us we matter, we're valuable. We're not going to disappear just because someone finds us inconvenient. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on those notifications so you never miss a story. Because these stories might save someone's life. They might give someone courage to stand up. They might help someone realize they're not crazy, not too much, not the problem. You being part of this community, you sharing these videos, you leaving your comments and your own stories, that all matters. That all makes a difference. So subscribe now and let's build something beautiful together. Something that proves getting old doesn't mean giving up. Facing challenges doesn't mean accepting defeat. Being vulnerable doesn't mean being powerless. The wedding, Jessica's perfect dream wedding, became the day I took my life back. It became the day I proved you can't erase someone just because they're inconvenient. It became the day I showed everyone that underestimating an old woman is a terrible mistake. Jessica thought she was getting rid of a burden, clearing the stage for her perfect performance. Instead, she got exposed in front of everyone who mattered to her. Her friends saw who she really was. Her daughter learned hard lessons. Christopher's family got a clear picture of what they'd married into. And me? I got my dignity back. I got my life back. I got proof I was never the problem, was never really as lost as everyone said, was always still here, still fighting, still mattering. That's worth more than any revenge I could have planned, more than any legal victory, more than anything Jessica could have given me even if she'd wanted to. I still have hard days. Some mornings the depression tries to creep back, tries to tell me I really am too much, that I should make myself small and convenient. Old habits die hard. Years believing you're declining doesn't disappear overnight. But now I have tools to fight back. Medication that treats what's actually wrong. A therapist who helps me process everything. Ruth checking in constantly, reminding me of my worth. A support group full of people who understand. Legal protections meaning I'm safe. And all of you, everyone watching, everyone who's going to subscribe and comment and share their stories and build this community with me. That's powerful medicine. Knowing I'm not alone, knowing my story matters, knowing that by sharing what happened, I might help someone else avoid the same fate or find courage to fight back against their own Jessica. So let me end by saying this, and I need you to really hear me, to let these words sink deep into whatever part of you has been made to feel small or worthless or disposable. If someone in your life is trying to convince you that you're less than you are, that you're too much work, that you need to be managed or controlled or put somewhere out of the way, listen very carefully. They're wrong. Not sort of wrong, not partially wrong, but completely and utterly wrong. You are valuable exactly as you are right now, with all your struggles and challenges and imperfections. You deserve to be loved, not tolerated. You deserve to be included, not erased. You deserve to take up space and be seen and be heard. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise. Don't sign away your power. Don't let fear or confusion or exhaustion make you agree to things that hurt you. Ask questions. Get second opinions. Involve people you trust. Protect yourself legally. And most importantly, remember that age and illness don't define your worth. Jessica tried to define me by my supposed disease, tried to reduce me to nothing but symptoms and inconveniences. She failed. I'm so much more than what she tried to make me. And you are too. Whatever you're facing, whatever challenges you're dealing with, they don't get to be the whole story of who you are. You're still you, still valuable, still deserving of love and respect and dignity. Now here's what I need from you before you go. I need you to take action right now while this story is fresh in your mind, while you're feeling fired up and ready to stand up for yourself or someone you love. First, scroll down and hit that like button. Smash it. Destroy it. Because every like tells YouTube this message needs to spread, that there are thousands of us refusing to be disposable, that this story matters. Your like might be the reason this video reaches someone tomorrow who desperately needs to hear it. So like it right now. Don't scroll past this. Don't tell yourself you'll do it later. Do it now. Second, leave that comment if you haven't already. I deserve to be loved, not tolerated. 6 words that might change your life, that might give someone else the courage they need, that might start a revolution of people refusing to accept less than they deserve. Write it now. Let's flood these comments with that truth until it's undeniable, until everyone watching can see they're not alone, until the algorithm itself has to acknowledge that this message is powerful and important and necessary. Third, share this video. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Post it on your timeline. Put it in your family group chat. Share it in communities where people are struggling with these issues. Because this video isn't just entertainment. It's not just a story to pass the time. This video might literally save someone's life. It might give them the strength to leave an abusive situation. It might help them realize they're not losing their mind. They're being gaslit. It might inspire them to get proper medical care instead of accepting a diagnosis that serves someone else's purposes. Your share matters. Your engagement matters. You matter. And finally, most critically, subscribe to this channel right now. This is not optional. This is not something you do if you feel like it. If my story resonated with you, if you felt seen and understood and validated by anything I've shared, you owe it to yourself and to this community to subscribe. Click that button. Turn on notifications. Become part of something bigger than yourself. Because this channel is building a movement. We're creating a space where the elderly aren't invisible, where the sick aren't disposable, where the vulnerable aren't alone, where everyone gets to keep their dignity no matter what challenges they face. Every week, I'm sharing new stories that will make you feel less alone, that will give you strength, that will remind you of your worth. Stories from my life, and from others who've reached out after watching these videos, who found their voice because they saw me find mine, who've decided to fight back because they saw me fight back. When you subscribe, you're not just getting content, you're joining a family, a real family that actually loves you instead of just tolerating you, that values you for who you are instead of what you can provide, that will stand beside you when you need support. You're telling me and everyone else here that you believe people matter at every age, in every condition, with every challenge. You're saying no to a world that treats aging as shameful and illness as inconvenient. You're declaring that you will not go quietly, will not shrink, will not disappear just because someone else finds you uncomfortable or difficult or expensive to love. Hit that subscribe button right now. I'm serious. Right now. Don't finish watching without subscribing because you'll forget, you'll mean to come back but you won't, and you'll miss out on being part of something that could genuinely change your life. I promise you, if you subscribe, you won't regret it. You'll find stories every week that speak to your soul, that validate your experiences, that give you language for things you felt but couldn't express. You'll find a comment section full of people who understand, who've been there, who will support you through your own struggles. You'll find hope when everything feels hopeless, strength when you feel weak, community when you feel alone. This isn't just a YouTube channel. This is a lifeline for people who've been told they don't matter anymore. This is proof that we do matter, that we always mattered, that nothing, absolutely nothing can take away our fundamental worth as human beings. So, subscribe right now. Do it for yourself. Do it for me. Do it for everyone watching who needs to know they're not alone. Do it because refusing to subscribe is like refusing to claim your own value, like agreeing that maybe you are too much, like accepting that you should just quietly disappear. And we both know that's not true. You matter. I matter. We all matter. So prove it. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Join this community of fighters and survivors and people who refuse to be erased. The wedding that was supposed to be Jessica's crowning achievement became the day everything changed. It became the day I stopped being a victim and became someone who fights back. It became the day I proved that old doesn't mean weak, that confused doesn't mean powerless, that vulnerable doesn't mean defenseless. It became the day Jessica learned that some people fight back, that some people refuse to disappear, that some people will burn down your perfect day if that's what it takes to reclaim their dignity. And honestly, I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I'd do it 1,000 times over, because my dignity, my worth, my right to exist in my own home and live my own life, that's worth any amount of drama or conflict or destroyed weddings. That's worth standing up in front of 200 people and telling the truth even when my hands are shaking and my voice is cracking and I'm terrified of what comes next. That's worth everything. And here's what I want you to take away from this story. The real lesson underneath all the drama and revenge and family dysfunction. The lesson is this: you get to fight back. You get to stand up for yourself. You get to say no when someone tries to dispose of you or diminish you or make you smaller than you are. You don't have to accept mistreatment just because you're old or sick or dependent. You don't have to go quietly into whatever nightmare someone else has planned for you. You have power even when you feel powerless. You have worth even when everyone treats you as worthless. You have rights even when everyone acts like you don't. And sometimes, when you're backed into a corner with nowhere left to go, the only option left is to come out swinging. That's what I did at that wedding. I came out swinging. I burned it all down rather than let Jessica win. And you know what? The world didn't end. My family didn't collapse completely. Life went on, just with more honesty, more accountability, more respect for the person I actually am, instead of the convenient fiction Jessica wanted me to be. 6 months later, I'm thriving in ways I never imagined possible. I'm painting. I'm making friends. I'm rebuilding relationships on honest foundations instead of lies and manipulation. I'm living in my own home with legal protections, ensuring nobody can take that away from me ever again. I'm taking medication that actually treats what's wrong with me instead of accepting a misdiagnosis that served someone else's agenda. I'm going to therapy and working through the trauma of those 4 years when I thought I was losing my mind. I'm stronger now than I was before all this happened. I'm clearer about who I am and what I deserve. I'm less willing to accept mistreatment or manipulation or gaslighting. I'm more protective of my boundaries and my peace. And I'm using my experience to help others, sharing my story so people watching know they're not alone, know they're not crazy, know they can fight back too. That's why this channel exists. That's why I put myself out here, vulnerable and exposed, telling stories that are deeply personal and sometimes painful. Because if my story helps even one person stand up for themselves, if it gives even one person the courage to say no to their own Jessica, if it saves even one person from years of unnecessary suffering, then it's worth it. So I'm asking you one more time, subscribe, please. Not for me, although I appreciate every subscriber and I read every comment, and I'm grateful for this community we're building together. Subscribe for yourself. Subscribe because you deserve to be reminded regularly that you matter, that you're valuable, that you're worth fighting for. Subscribe because you need this community of people who understand, who've been through it, who will support you when you feel like giving up. Subscribe because these stories, these messages, this constant drumbeat of you matter, you matter, you matter might be the thing that saves your life one day when you're standing at the edge wondering if anyone would even notice if you disappeared. We would notice. I would notice. This community would notice because every single person watching this, every subscriber, every commenter, every person who hits like and shares and engages, every one of you matters to all of us. We're in this together. We're building something beautiful and powerful and necessary, and we need you to be part of it. So click subscribe right now, turn on notifications, leave that comment, hit that like button, share this video, take action. Don't just consume this story and move on with your life unchanged. Let it change you. Let it empower you. Let it remind you that you have more strength than you think, more worth than anyone's told you, more fight left in you than you realized. And then come back next week for another story, another reminder, another dose of the truth that you deserve love and respect and dignity, no matter what challenges you're facing. I'll be here every week, sharing stories, building community, fighting back against a world that tries to make us invisible. Join me, subscribe, be part of this, because together we're unstoppable. Together we're changing the narrative about aging and illness and worth. Together we're proving that nobody, absolutely nobody, gets to decide we're disposable. We matter, you matter, I matter. Now go subscribe and let's change the world together. One story, one comment, one subscriber at a time. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for mattering. Now go take action and I'll see you in the next video. I started making phone calls. This is important. So pay attention if you're in a situation where someone is trying to take advantage of you, if you feel like you're being pushed toward decisions you don't want to make, if someone is controlling your narrative and making you doubt your own reality. I called my old lawyer, Martin, who'd been a friend of my husband's for 40 years, who'd handled our estate planning and our wills and every legal matter we'd ever had. I hadn't spoken to him in a couple of years because Jessica had convinced me that we didn't need him anymore, that she and David had everything under control, that bothering Martin with every little thing was unnecessary and probably expensive. But I found his number in an old address book I kept hidden in my closet, and I called him early that morning before Jessica got up, before anyone could overhear, before I lost my clarity and courage. Martin answered on the third ring, and when he heard my voice, he sounded genuinely happy to hear from me. Said he'd been wondering how I was doing. Said David had been kind of vague whenever Martin ran into him around town. I took a deep breath, and I explained the situation, every detail I could remember. The house transfer, the promises that had been made about lifetime care, the way Jessica had been treating me, the isolation, the gaslighting, the nursing home papers given to me 3 days before a wedding like I was garbage being taken out before guests arrived. I told Martin about overhearing Jessica's phone conversation, about catching her rearranging my things, about the pattern of incidents that made me look worse than I was. I told him about feeling like I couldn't trust my own mind anymore, about the fear that had become my constant companion, about lying awake at night wondering if I really was as bad as everyone said or if something else was going on, something darker and more deliberate. Martin listened without interrupting, and I could hear the anger building in his voice as I talked. When I finally finished, When I'd poured out everything I'd been holding in for years, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Margaret, I need to ask you some questions about the house transfer. Walk me through exactly what happened, what was said, what promises were made, whether you felt pressured, whether you understood what you were signing, whether there were any witnesses, whether you got independent advice before signing." We talked for over an hour, maybe closer to 2 hours, going through every detail of that day 4 years ago when I'd signed over my home. Martin asked me about my mental state at the time, about whether I'd been properly evaluated, about what my doctors had actually said versus what Jessica had told people they said. He asked about the nursing home papers, about whether Jessica had power of attorney, about what rights I actually had in this situation. By the end of that conversation, I had options. I had legal options that I hadn't known existed, rights that nobody had told me about, protections that should have been explained to me before I signed anything. Martin said that when someone with cognitive concerns signs over property under promises of lifetime care, if those promises are broken, if the person is coerced or misled, if proper procedures weren't followed, there are remedies. We could challenge the transfer. We could file for elder abuse. We could make a case that I'd been manipulated and isolated and systematically convinced I was worse off than I actually was. Martin said he'd need to review the paperwork, talk to my doctors, gather evidence, but he thought we had a strong case. He also said, and this is what really got my attention, that he'd heard rumors around town about Jessica, whispers about how she treated me, observations from people who'd seen her in public with me and noticed something off about the dynamic, comments from mutual friends who'd tried to visit me and been turned away, or told I was too confused for visitors. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who'd noticed that something was wrong. I'd just been too isolated and too confused and too beaten down to realize that other people were seeing it too, that the mask Jessica wore so carefully sometimes slipped in front of others, that her performance wasn't quite as convincing as she thought it was. But I didn't want to go the legal route right away, not immediately, not as my first move. That felt too clean, too simple, too much like letting Jessica off easy. Legal proceedings would be private, would be handled by lawyers and judges, would maybe result in some financial penalties or orders that she probably wouldn't follow anyway. That wasn't enough. I didn't just want justice in some abstract legal sense. I wanted Jessica to feel what she'd made me feel. I wanted her to experience that moment of betrayal, that crushing realization that someone you trusted has turned against you, that sickening understanding that you've been exposed and everyone sees you for what you really are, in front of everyone who mattered to her. In the moment when she thought she had everything she'd ever wanted, I wanted her perfect day to crumble the way she'd been systematically crumbling my life. I wanted her to stand in front of 200 people and have to face what she'd done, have to see the judgment in their eyes, have to feel the shift as her carefully constructed image collapsed and everyone saw the truth underneath. So I told Martin to prepare everything, to have all the legal documents ready, to build the case, but to wait on filing anything. I told him I had something else in mind first, something that would be much more effective than a lawsuit that might drag on for years and cost a fortune and maybe not even result in real change. I also called my sister Ruth, who lives 2 states away in Arizona, where she'd retired with her husband 5 years earlier. Ruth and I had drifted apart over the years, mainly because she'd never liked Jessica, and had told me repeatedly that my daughter-in-law was manipulative and selfish and not to be trusted, that she saw through Jessica's act, that the way Jessica looked at me when she thought nobody was watching was cold and calculating and wrong. I hadn't wanted to hear it back then, had defended Jessica vigorously, had made excuses for her behavior, had told Ruth she was being unfair and judgmental and not seeing all the good that Jessica did for me. I'd chosen Jessica over Ruth in some ways, had let our sisterly relationship grow distant because I didn't want to hear criticism of the woman I'd convinced myself really cared about me, really saw me as family, really loved me like a daughter. But now I needed Ruth's help, needed her strength and her clarity and her willingness to speak truth even when it was uncomfortable. When I called her that morning and told her what had happened, when I told her about the nursing home papers and Jessica's phone conversation and the wedding and the plan I was forming, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Ruth said, voice shaking with fury, "I'm on the next flight out. Don't sign anything else. Don't agree to anything else. Don't let that woman make you feel small. I'm coming, and we're going to fix this. Ruth arrived 2 days later, and the look on Jessica's face when she saw my sister walking through the front door with her suitcase was absolutely priceless. For a split second before she got her mask back in place, I saw pure panic flash across Jessica's features. She hadn't expected this, hadn't planned for this, had been operating under the assumption that I was too isolated and too confused to call for backup. Ruth wasn't supposed to be part of her plan, wasn't supposed to be here watching and asking questions, and interfering with the smooth execution of getting me shipped off to Sunny Meadows. Jessica tried to act welcoming, putting on her gracious hostess voice, saying how wonderful it was that Ruth could visit, how she should have called ahead so they could have prepared the guest room properly, how of course she was welcome to stay as long as she wanted. But I could see the tension in Jessica's shoulders, could see her mind racing trying to figure out how to manage this new variable, could see her calculating how to work around Ruth's presence without appearing unwelcoming or unkind. Ruth just smiled at her, that dangerous smile I remembered from our childhood when she was about to do something that would get us both in trouble, and said she hoped she wasn't imposing, that she'd just had this strong feeling she needed to come see her sister. That family should stick together, especially during difficult times. Over the next few days, I played my part perfectly. This was crucial to the plan. This performance I had to give. This act of being even worse than Jessica thought I was. I needed her confident, needed her convinced that she'd won, needed her so sure of my incompetence that she wouldn't see the trap closing around her. So I acted more confused than I actually was, more helpless, more dependent, more lost in my own mind. I asked the same questions multiple times even when I remembered the answers. I put things in strange places and then seemed baffled when I couldn't find them. I called people by wrong names, mixing up Chloe and Jessica, sometimes calling David by his father's name. I stared off into space during conversations as if I'd lost the thread entirely. I needed Jessica to believe that any threat I might have posed, any danger I might have represented to her plans, any chance I might have had of fighting back, was completely gone, burned away by a disease that was consuming me from the inside out, and Jessica bought it completely. I could see the relief on her face every time I demonstrated my confusion, could see her relaxing more and more, could see her confidence growing as she became convinced that I was far too gone to cause her any problems. I even signed some of the preliminary papers for the nursing home, sitting at the kitchen table with Jessica guiding my hand to the signature lines, watching her face light up with barely concealed satisfaction as she witnessed me literally signing away my freedom, my autonomy, my right to stay in my own home. She thought it was all coming together for her, thought she was so clever, thought she'd managed everything so smoothly and carefully and perfectly. She had no idea what was coming, had no clue that every confused question I asked was being carefully calculated, that every moment of seeming incompetence was a performance designed to lull her into complacency, that the helpless old woman she saw sitting across from her was actually setting a trap that was about to snap shut on her perfect life. Ruth and I would sit together in my room at night, after everyone else had gone to bed, planning every detail with the kind of precision that comes from righteous anger and the need for perfect timing. My sister brought documents she'd printed out, emails I'd sent her over the years that I'd forgotten I'd written, messages detailing incidents where Jessica had been cruel or manipulative or controlling, times when I'd reached out to Ruth feeling scared and alone and like something was wrong, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. We built a case, not a legal case exactly, although Martin was doing that separately, but something better. We built a story, a true story, a narrative backed up by evidence and witnesses and documentation of how Jessica had systematically isolated me from friends and family who might have questioned what was happening, how she'd manipulated my medical care to serve her purposes, how she'd convinced everyone I was worse off than I actually was, how she'd positioned herself as the martyr caring for her difficult mother-in-law while actually making my condition worse through stress and gaslighting and emotional abuse. Ruth had kept everything I'd ever sent her, every email and text message and letter, and some of them I didn't even remember writing. Messages from 3 years ago, or 2 years ago, or 6 months ago, describing incidents that had gotten lost in the fog of my memory, but that painted a clear picture when laid out chronologically. We had dates and times and specific examples. We had my testimony, which Ruth had carefully written down during my clear moments over those few days, making sure to document everything while I could still articulate it clearly. We had Ruth's own observations from her previous visits, times when she'd noticed Jessica's coldness toward me, moments when the mask had slipped and Ruth had seen something ugly underneath. We had a plan for exactly when and how to deploy all this information for maximum impact, for the moment when it would hurt Jessica most, when it would be most effective at destroying the image she'd worked so hard to create. The wedding day arrived on a perfect Saturday in June, the kind of day that makes you believe in magic and happy endings, and all the fairy tales you stopped believing in when you grew up and learned that life is more complicated than storybooks suggest. The weather was exactly what Jessica had prayed for, had been checking obsessively for weeks leading up to the event, waking up every morning and immediately looking at her phone to see if the forecast had changed. It was sunny, but not too hot, maybe 75 degrees with a gentle breeze that made the ribbons on the chairs flutter prettily without being strong enough to blow over any of the carefully arranged decorations. The backyard had been transformed into something from a magazine, from one of those wedding publications that Jessica had been poring over for months, flagging pages and showing David pictures and saying, "This is what I want. This is the feeling we're going for. This is how perfect it's going to be." White roses and hydrangeas everywhere, hundreds and hundreds of them, filling every surface, creating walls of flowers that must have cost an absolute fortune. Strings of lights zigzagging overhead waiting to glow when evening came and turn the whole space into something enchanted. Tables covered in silk linens, pale blue and white, with centerpieces that probably cost more than most people spend on rent in a month. Elaborate arrangements of flowers and candles and crystal that caught the sunlight and threw little rainbows across the tablecloths. The guests started arriving around 4 in the afternoon, and watching them come in was like watching a parade of wealth and status and carefully curated perfection. Women in designer dresses that probably had price tags with 4 digits, wearing jewelry that glinted in the sunlight, carrying little purses that cost more than my monthly medication bills. Men in expensive suits, the kind you can tell are custom-tailored just by the way they fit, wearing watches that could probably pay for a year of nursing home care. The kind of people who air kiss instead of actually hugging, who compare vacation homes in conversation, who name drop country clubs and charity boards and mutual friends who are also wealthy and important. These were Christopher's family and friends, mixed in with Jessica's carefully curated guest list of people she wanted to impress, people whose approval and acceptance meant everything to her social ambitions, people who represented the world she'd been trying to break into for years. Jessica was in her element, absolutely glowing with triumph and satisfaction, floating around in her mother-of-the-bride dress that probably cost more than the wedding dress I wore 47 years ago when I married David's father. She greeted everyone with that practiced smile of hers, the one that looked genuine if you didn't know her, the one that hid all the calculation and ambition and cold assessment happening behind her eyes. Chloe looked beautiful, I have to admit that. Whatever else Jessica had done wrong, and she'd done plenty wrong, she'd raised a lovely daughter, kind and sweet and innocent of her mother's manipulations. Seeing her in that wedding dress, all white lace and silk with a train that pooled behind her like water, with her hair done up in intricate curls and her face glowing with happiness and hope and all the dreams that young brides have about their futures, made my heart ache with memories. I thought of David's wedding, of holding my own bouquet and feeling so hopeful about the future, about the family we were building, about the love I thought we'd all share forever. I thought about how naive I'd been, how trusting, how I'd welcomed Jessica into our family with open arms and an open heart, never imagining that she'd eventually try to throw me away like garbage. I thought about how that young bride version of myself could never have imagined ending up here, 78 years old, and about to expose my daughter-in-law's cruelty in front of 200 wedding guests, about to burn down the perfect day she'd spent a year planning, about to prove that sometimes you have to destroy something to save yourself. I'd been relegated to a back table, of course, far from the main action, far from the important guests, tucked away where I wouldn't draw attention or cause problems or remind anyone that this perfect venue was actually my home, my life's work, my memories. I was seated with some distant cousins I barely knew, people I maybe saw once every 5 years at funerals or milestone birthdays, people who didn't really know me or care about me but who'd been invited because you have to invite family even when they're not particularly close. Jessica had made it very clear that morning what my role was supposed to be, had sat me down and spoken to me in that slow, careful voice she used when she thought I was particularly confused, explaining that I was to sit quietly, not draw attention to myself, not embarrass her, not do anything that might disrupt the ceremony or the reception. She'd even assigned one of her friends to check on me periodically, a woman named Barbara who I'd met maybe twice before, and who clearly saw babysitting the confused old lady as a chore she'd been guilted into, a favor she was doing for Jessica that she'd rather not be doing. I played along, sitting there with my hands folded, smiling vaguely at people who passed by, looking for all the world like a confused old woman who was lucky to be included at all, who should be grateful to be allowed to attend this important event, even in this diminished capacity, who posed no threat to anyone's carefully laid plans. Ruth sat beside me, squeezing my hand occasionally, reminding me quietly that we were going to wait for exactly the right moment, that timing was everything, that we needed to let Jessica get comfortable and confident, and completely convinced she'd pulled it off before we made our move. The ceremony was beautiful. I have to say that honestly, even though I was about to destroy what came after. Chloe and Christopher exchanged vows under an arch covered in white roses and trailing vines, with a string quartet playing something classical and elegant, with the breeze carrying the scent of flowers and fresh-cut grass, with 200 people watching and crying happy tears and probably thinking about their own weddings, or their own love stories or their own hopes for the future. The officiant spoke about love and commitment and building a life together, about partnership and respect, and choosing each other every day, about the sacred bond being formed between these two young people and between their families. If there was any irony in those words, any disconnect between what was being said about family and respect, and what Jessica had actually done to her own family, nobody seemed to notice. Chloe said her vows with tears streaming down her face, promising to love Christopher in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, till death do them part. Christopher's voice shook when he made his promises, and you could see that he really meant them, that this wasn't just a performance or a social obligation, but something real and precious to him. When they were pronounced husband and wife and kissed while everyone applauded, I felt tears on my own cheeks, though mine were for different reasons than everyone else's around me. I was crying for the family I thought I had, for the trust I'd given so freely and had shattered so completely, for the love I'd believed in that had turned out to be conditional and transactional and ultimately false. I was crying for all the years I'd wasted believing I was valued when I was really just tolerated, believing I was family when I was really just convenient, believing I mattered when I was really just useful until I wasn't anymore. The reception started as soon as the ceremony ended, with guests moving from the chairs arranged in rows for the ceremony to the tables set up for dinner, with waiters in crisp uniforms appearing with trays of champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres, with music starting to play and people beginning to mingle and laugh and settle into the celebration. Dinner was served, multiple courses that kept coming and coming, each one more elaborate than the last, the kind of meal where you're not really sure what you're eating, but you know it's expensive and probably has a French name and was prepared by a chef who Jessica had hired from some exclusive restaurant. There were toasts between courses, speeches that made people laugh and cry and raise their glasses, declarations of love and promises of support and welcomes into families. David gave a toast about his daughter, about watching her grow up, about being proud of the woman she'd become, about how Christopher was lucky to have her and he better treat her right, or else face a father's wrath, though he said it jokingly and everyone laughed. Christopher's father talked about gaining a daughter, about how Chloe had impressed them all from the first time Christopher brought her home, about the beautiful future they were all building together, about how this was just the beginning of something wonderful. The speeches were lovely and heartfelt, and everything wedding speeches are supposed to be, full of sentiment and humor and promises of happily ever after. And then it was Jessica's turn. She stood up with her champagne glass held high, and the whole crowd quieted down to hear what the mother of the bride had to say, what wisdom and emotion and memories she would share, what blessing she would bestow on this new marriage and this new chapter in her daughter's life. The string lights had come on by then, casting a warm glow over everything, making the whole scene look magical and perfect and exactly like something from a dream. Jessica started talking about Chloe's childhood, about the sacrifices she'd made as a mother, about sleepless nights and school projects and dance recitals and all the ordinary, extraordinary moments of raising a child. She talked about how this wedding represented everything everything she'd worked for, every choice she'd made, every sacrifice she'd accepted, every challenge she'd overcome. She talked about how this beautiful property and this perfect day were the result of years of planning and dedication and vision and hard work, about how she'd imagined this moment for so long, and now it was finally here, and it was even better than she'd dreamed. She went on, taking credit for everything, painting herself as this devoted mother who'd single-handedly created this magical moment through sheer force of will and determination and love. She talked about the venue like it was hers, like she'd built this house and planted these gardens and created this beautiful space where her daughter was getting married. Never mind that every rose bush, every tree, every inch of this property was actually mine, was the work of my hands and my husband's hands, and our 50 years of living here and loving here and building a home. She didn't mention me once, not once. Didn't acknowledge that this was my home, my garden, my life's work that she was using as her backdrop, as her stage for this performance of perfect motherhood. Didn't mention that I'd helped raise Chloe, had babysat her countless times when Jessica needed a break, or had appointments, or just wanted a day to herself, had taught her to bake cookies and plant flowers and all the small skills that grandmothers pass down to granddaughters. Didn't acknowledge that Chloe had come to me with problems sometimes, had sat in my kitchen eating cookies and talking about school troubles or friend drama or confusion about growing up, had trusted me with her secrets and her fears and her dreams. I'd been erased from the narrative completely, written out of the story like I'd never existed, like I'd contributed nothing to this family or this day or this young woman's life. And I could see from the way Jessica was glowing, from the pride in her voice and the satisfaction in her smile, that she thought she'd pulled off the perfect elimination, that she'd successfully removed the inconvenient old woman from her story without anyone noticing or caring, that she'd gotten away with it completely and was now being rewarded with admiration and applause, and the approval of all these important people she'd been trying so hard to impress. That's when Ruth stood up. She didn't ask for permission, didn't wait to be introduced, didn't check with anyone or signal what she was about to do. She just stood up with her own glass raised, and her voice rang out clear and strong across the garden, cutting through the applause that was still rippling through the crowd after Jessica's speech. "I'd like to say a few words too, if I may," she announced, and I could see Jessica's face go from glowing with triumph to pale with shock in the space of a heartbeat. The crowd looked confused but interested, probably thinking this was some eccentric relative who was about to embarrass everyone with an inappropriate story, or an oversharing moment, or something awkward that would make everyone uncomfortable, but would at least be memorable. They had no idea what was actually about to happen, no clue that they were about to witness something much more dramatic and uncomfortable and honestly unforgettable than they'd signed up for when they accepted their wedding invitations. Ruth smiled at them all, that dangerous smile of hers that I'd known meant trouble since we were children, that smile that said someone was about to get exactly what they deserved, and she began to speak in a voice that carried across the garden and demanded attention and brooked no interruption. "I'm Margaret's sister," she said, gesturing to me at my back table, making 200 pairs of eyes suddenly turn to look at the confused old lady they'd barely noticed. "And I've known Jessica for almost as long as she's been part of this family. I've watched her very carefully over the years, watched how she treats the woman who gave her this home, who welcomed her with open arms, who loved her like a daughter. And I think it's time everyone here knew the truth about whose property you're celebrating on today, whose garden you're standing in, whose roses you're admiring, whose life's work is providing the backdrop for this supposedly perfect day, and what was supposed to happen to Margaret 3 days ago. You could have heard a pin drop in that moment. The entire reception fell silent in a way that felt almost supernatural, like someone had pressed a pause button on the whole world, like time itself had stopped to listen to what was about to be revealed. 200 people holding their breath, forks suspended halfway to mouths, conversations dying mid-sentence, laughter cutting off abruptly, champagne glasses frozen in mid-air. Every eye was on Ruth, every ear straining to hear what she was about to say, every mind trying to process this unexpected interruption to the carefully scripted perfection of the evening. Jessica tried to interrupt, tried to laugh it off, made some comment about how Ruth didn't need to bore everyone with family history, about how this wasn't the time, about how they should let the bride and groom enjoy their day. But Ruth kept going, speaking over Jessica's attempts to stop her, raising her voice just enough to make it clear she would not be silenced, would not be shut down, would not be dismissed or diverted or convinced to sit down and be quiet. She told them about the nursing home papers, She told them how I'd signed over my house 4 years ago under the explicit promise that I'd always have a home here, that I'd be taken care of, that David and Jessica would never abandon me, that I'd be safe and loved and looked after for the rest of my life. She told them about Jessica's phone conversations, the ones I'd overheard where she'd called me a burden and joked about my confusion and said she couldn't wait to get rid of me. She told them about the systematic way Jessica had been making me look worse than I was, hiding my things, and then expressing concern when I couldn't find them, telling people I'd done things I hadn't done, exaggerating my symptoms to justify what she wanted to do, isolating me from friends and family who might have questioned her narrative. Ruth pulled out her phone, and in the glowing light from the string lights overhead, she read, word for word, from emails I'd sent her over the years, messages I'd forgotten I'd written, communications I'd sent during moments of clarity or fear or confusion, desperate reaching out to the one person who'd always told me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it. She read about the time Jessica had accused me of leaving the stove on when I knew I hadn't, about the way Jessica spoke to me when she thought nobody was listening, about feeling like I was going crazy because my perception of reality never seemed to match what Jessica told everyone was happening, about the fear I felt living in my own home with someone who treated me with contempt, hidden under a veneer of false concern. She read about incidents I'd shared with her 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, painting a picture that was impossible to deny, showing a pattern that was clear and consistent and absolutely damning, demonstrating beyond any doubt that this had been going on for years, that it wasn't a misunderstanding or a single bad moment, but a systematic campaign to diminish and control and eventually dispose of me. The crowd was riveted now. You could see it in their faces, in the way they leaned forward to hear better, in the way they'd forgotten entirely about their food and their drinks and their celebration. These wealthy, comfortable people who'd come for champagne and cake and a beautiful wedding were getting something much more dramatic than they'd expected, much more real and raw and uncomfortable than the polished perfection they'd been promised. I watched Jessica's friends, the ones who'd been air-kissing her an hour ago and complimenting her dress and telling her how perfect everything looked, start to whisper to each other with their hands covering their mouths, their expressions changing from confusion to shock, to judgment, to that particular kind of satisfaction people get when they realize someone they envied or resented is being exposed. I watched David's face as he listened to his aunt describe things he'd either not known about or chosen not to see, watched him look at his wife and then at me with something that might have been shame or guilt or horror at what he'd allowed to happen, watched him piece together a picture he should have seen years ago but had been too comfortable or too trusting or too unwilling to look at. Chloe was crying, but not the happy tears from the ceremony an hour earlier, not the joyful emotion of a bride on her perfect day. These were different tears entirely, tears of embarrassment and confusion, and the horrible realization that her perfect wedding day was falling apart in front of everyone who mattered to her. Tears of understanding that her mother had done something terrible and everyone now knew about it. Tears of shock at learning that the grandmother she'd been told was too confused to be reliable had actually been abused and manipulated right under everyone's noses. And Jessica. Oh, Jessica looked like she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole, like she wanted to disappear into the earth and never be seen again, like she'd been stripped naked in front of an audience and had nowhere to hide. Her face had gone from pale to red to purple, cycling through colors as different emotions flashed across her features, panic and rage and shame and desperate calculation, all fighting for dominance. She kept trying to interrupt, kept trying to stop Ruth, kept making sounds of protest and denial. But my sister is a force of nature when she wants to be, has always been unstoppable when she believes she's fighting for something important, and she wasn't finished yet, wasn't even close to finished with the story she'd come here to tell. 3 days ago, Ruth continued, her voice steady and clear and absolutely unwavering, cutting through Jessica's protests like they didn't exist. Jessica gave Margaret a gift. She wrapped it in silver paper with a white bow, made it look like something special, something celebratory. Inside were brochures for nursing homes and admission papers ready to be signed. She told her mother-in-law, the woman who gave her everything, who signed over this house believing she'd always be welcome here, who loved her and trusted her and treated her like a daughter, that it was time to go. She said Margaret was too much work, that her forgetfulness was embarrassing, that she needed to be gone before this wedding because her presence would be an inconvenience, because having a confused old woman at the reception might reflect badly on Jessica in front of all you important people. might tarnish the perfect image Jessica had been working so hard to create. Ruth paused, letting that sink in, letting the crowd absorb the cruelty of it, letting them sit with the ugliness of what had been done and what they'd unknowingly been participating in by celebrating here, by eating this food and drinking this champagne, and admiring this venue without knowing the price that had almost been paid for it. Then she turned to look directly at Jessica, and there was something almost like pity in her expression. Pity for someone who'd sold their soul for approval and status, and was now learning what that really cost. "What you didn't know, Jessica," Ruth said, her voice dropping lower but somehow carrying even better in the silence. "What you were too arrogant to consider, what you couldn't imagine in your wildest nightmares, is that Margaret might have Alzheimer's, but she's not gone. She's still here. She still feels everything. She still understands what you've done to her, and she remembers enough, and I remember everything she's told me, to know exactly what you are. You're not the devoted daughter-in-law you pretend to be. You're not the selfless caregiver you want everyone to believe you are. You're someone who saw an elderly woman as an obstacle to the life you wanted, who decided that getting rid of her was worth any amount of cruelty and manipulation, who was willing to throw away someone who loved you and trusted you just to have a perfect wedding venue and full control of a house you didn't earn and don't deserve. Have you ever watched someone's carefully constructed world collapse in real time? Have you ever seen the exact moment when a person realizes that everyone knows their secret, that their mask has been ripped away in front of the people they most wanted to impress, that the image they've spent years building has just shattered into a million pieces that can never be put back together? That's what I was watching as Ruth finished speaking, as the silence stretched out and everyone stared at Jessica, waiting to see how she'd respond, whether she'd try to deny it or explain it, or somehow make it okay when clearly it could never be okay. I was watching Jessica's face cycle through emotions faster than I could track them, watching her try on different responses and discard them, watching her realize that there was no way out of this, no spin she could put on it, no explanation that would make 200 people suddenly forget what they'd just heard. And I wish I could tell you I felt nothing but satisfaction in that moment, that watching Jessica's humiliation and exposure gave me pure joy, that I reveled in her suffering the way she'd seemed to revel in mine. But the truth is more complicated than that, messier and harder to articulate. Part of me was triumphant, yes. Part of me was glad that Jessica was finally being held accountable, that her cruelty was being exposed, that she couldn't hide anymore behind her perfect smile and her concerned daughter-in-law routine, that everyone could see what she really was underneath all the performance. But part of me was just sad, deeply and exhaustingly sad, the kind of sadness that goes bone deep and settles in for a long stay. Because this meant the final death of the family I thought I had, the definitive end of any illusion that we were people who loved each other and took care of each other and put each other first. This meant acknowledging that the love I'd believed in was never really there, that I'd been fooling myself for years, that the warm embrace I'd felt from Jessica had always been fake, calculated, maintained only as long as I was useful and discarded the moment I became inconvenient. This meant accepting that my son had either known on some level what was happening and chosen to look away, or had been so blind and so comfortable that he'd let his wife abuse his mother without noticing, and I wasn't sure which of those possibilities hurt more. This meant that my granddaughter's wedding, which should have been one of the happiest days of her life, had been destroyed. And even though that destruction was necessary, even though exposing Jessica's cruelty was the right thing to do, I still felt guilty about it. Still felt like maybe I should have found another way. Still wondered if I'd just perpetuated more pain in trying to defend myself from the pain Jessica had inflicted. Maybe you know this feeling. Maybe you're dealing with someone right now who you thought loved you, thought cared about you, but you're starting to see signs that their affection has conditions, that your value to them is based on what you can provide rather than who you are, that you're being slowly pushed aside or diminished or prepared for disposal. If that's you, if you're watching this and your heart